Slave! 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 You're a slave!
Cast off your chains.
Oop, sorry. Getting a little ahead of myself. Hey there, boils and gargoyles. I'm an inexplicably conscious phenomenon that refers to itself as Casey Katsaris. And I was born within the borders of a concept commonly known as the United States of America. If you also reside in the concept of America, you've probably spent the last few years feeling extremely angry. I know I certainly have. And whenever I feel angry, I think it's wise to ask myself, what am I so angry about? And why, specifically? And when I asked myself why I've been so angry lately, my answer to myself was, I've been lied to. I've been tricked. I feel betrayed, let down, taken advantage of, exploited. I am angry in response to the protracted and staggering realization of just how much the people who own society have worked their employees' asses off to miseducate the fuck out of me. From the day I was born right up until this very moment. And I'm angry at myself for ever having fallen for it. And how was I miseducated? Well, I was told that capitalism is a good thing. And if you grew up in America, you were almost definitely told the same. You were probably taught, like I was, that we live in a capitalist meritocracy. A meritocracy that first and foremost rewards creative thinking and hard work. You were probably taught that the reason some people are super wealthy is because they're the most talented, the most industrious, the most innovative. And that the reason so many more people are poor is because they're the most lazy, the most irresponsible, the most foolish. But of course, we were all lied to. And then many of us, including myself once upon a time, unknowingly repeated the lie, believing it to be true. I think it's fair to say that every American who says that capitalism is good sincerely believes that it is. And that is currently what most Americans say. It can feel quite strange to belong to the minority of Americans who understand that capitalism is fundamentally unethical. You may start to wonder if you're crazy. Or you may start to feel like the majority of Americans are gaslighting you every time they share their political opinions. But again, for the most part, capitalism supporters know not what they do. They've been indoctrinated into capitalist thinking just like we all have. So there's no need to resent or blame everyday Americans who support capitalism. There's only a need to reject their misguided assertions and stand up for the truth. The truth that capitalism is not good. At least not good for most living things. In reality, capitalism is an intrinsically unethical system that does nothing so consistently as it makes rich people richer, poor people poorer, and alive people deader. The reasons for capitalism producing this global inequity, suffering, and death are complex and varied, but to put it simply, under capitalism, the owner class rules and the worker class drools. And with each passing generation, the tiny minority of human beings who make up that owner class pass their wealth down to their children, and then their children use said wealth to effectively purchase even more wealth than they already had. Be it through buying up rental properties and hiring someone else to manage them, acquiring other people's already successful businesses, hiring brokers to grow their money with a diverse and dependable stock portfolio, or any other number of business endeavors that, if one possesses the capital required to invest, are all but guaranteed to deliver a tidy profit with minimal effort. The most devout acolytes of capitalism often refer to these business endeavors as risk-taking, and then justify hyper-wealthy people's ever-increasing wealth as the ethical result of them taking smart financial risks that paid off big time. But a wealthy person spending a small fraction of their wealth, a fraction that they absolutely could afford to lose, on hiring other people to manage that wealth, make a profit off it, and then deliver the majority of the profit back to the original wealthy person, isn't really a risk at all. It's actually a super fucking safe bet. Now, that's not to say there are no examples of rich kids inheriting a bunch of money from their parents and subsequently blowing it all on dubious investments and pricey luxuries. Or that there are no examples of rich kids simply falling out of the top 1% and still remaining relatively well off. But these people are the exception, not the rule, and stand as a testament not to any set standard of fairness in our economic system, but rather to the exceptional dunderheadedness of the individuals in question. In addition, when people who are born rich somehow lose their fortune, the majority of what they lose usually goes to, you guessed it, other rich people, thus continuing to make the richest 1% richer, even as some born rich individuals might fall into the lower classes. But most people, if they're born into a large amount of capital and receive a little bit of professional guidance from their already wealthy and well-connected family, will end up handing down even more money than they inherited. Right now, some of you might be thinking that what I'm saying is bullshit. Perhaps, for example, you've heard a zealous capitalist refer to studies that claim only 21% of millionaires received any inheritance from their family, and that the large majority of exceptionally wealthy people are self-made. This can sound like a refutation of any claim that most wealthy people's success is primarily the result of randomly being born into wealth. Unless you actually dig into the methodology of these studies and how they define a self-made millionaire or billionaire. These extremely silly studies only account for direct inheritance from wealthy family members setting up trust funds or leaving a large amount of money when they pass away. They don't factor in how these supposedly self-made superstars received a higher quality of education, got hooked up with their family's professional connections, and/or were simply given monetary gifts, loans, and investments by their living family members. For example, the Billionaire Census, published by market research firm WealthX. Side note, what a fucking embarrassing name. WealthX? Spare me. That report actually includes guys like Amazon founder, rocket scientist purchaser, and avid iguana gobbler Jeff Bezos in their self-made billionaires category. Despite the fact that Jeff's parents provided him with a $245,000 loan in the 90s to help him get Amazon off the ground. You've probably also heard many media entities refer to Kylie Jenner as the youngest self-made billionaire in history, completely ignoring all of the financial support and professional guidance and cultural prestige that was showered upon her by her fantastically wealthy and world-famous family of cartoon sex mannequins. The fact is, there is no such thing as a self-made billionaire. Even if they were born into poverty, there's simply no way to pull in $1 billion of personal profit without exploiting workers all around the globe. It's pretty simple. If you are a billionaire with a B, you are essentially a thief who has profited off of an incalculable amount of human suffering. There's just no other way to get to that level of wealth. Of course, billionaires can't be totally blamed for the fundamental existence of unethical socioeconomic systems into which they were randomly born just like the rest of us. Nor do I think they can be condemned for the simple act of engaging with the current system to establish their own individual economic freedom. We're all human, we all want freedom, and under capitalism, acquiring a bunch of money is the only way to be free. And I think we can and should criticize billionaires for cranking capitalism up to maximum exploitation, hoarding more money than they could ever spend, and, along the way, inexorably committing mass crimes against humanity. Be they polluting and destroying the natural world, locking workers in sweatshops where, when a fire breaks out, all the workers are cooked alive, or reducing the miraculous invention that is the internet to yet another expanse of fucking corporate real estate, which billionaires have now bought up and mostly used to spread socially poisonous misinformation. So, maybe there shouldn't be billionaires. And maybe we shouldn't be quite so amazed by the children of billionaires finding a way to make another $1 billion. And it's not just wealthy kids benefiting from economic privilege. Even relatively small economic privileges delivered at an early age can have a huge impact on a person's long-term economic fate, like getting a used car on your 16th birthday, or being allowed to continue living at your parents' home past the age of 18. Or even just a somewhat fashionable wardrobe. Privileges that many American kids enjoy, and many other American kids do not. Not because of any given kid's merit, but simply because of the random circumstances of their birth. Not to mention that one of the greatest privileges, perhaps the greatest privilege, that well-off kids inherit from their well-off parents is not monetary gifts or professional connections. It's freedom from the psychological weight of poverty. Freedom from the anxiety and terror and trauma that comes from knowing your parents are not entirely sure how they're going to keep feeding you this month. This lack of psychological trauma is an asset that is valuable beyond measure and benefits the children of economically stable parents through every moment of every day of their upbringing. Also, when discussing economic privilege in America, there's this other little issue at play called race. Did you know that white people own 86% of the wealth in America, despite being only 60% of the population? And did you know that the amount of wealth stolen from black people who were enslaved in America is, first of all, impossible to calculate exactly, and even conservative estimates place it in the quadrillions of dollars? And did you know those people who were enslaved and robbed of quadrillions of dollars worth of labor and their dignity and their lives, they never got a refund? White American enslavers were forced to give up their slaves, but not the money they amassed from exploiting slaves. That they got to keep and invest and hand down to their lily white children. And on top of that, you know who did get a refund? The fucking slavers! Black Americans have still not received reparations for chattel slavery, and yet the men who enslaved them did. After the Emancipation Proclamation, the U.S. government paid slavers $300 for each slave that was freed. And if you don't know, $300 was a lot of fucking money back then. And why did the U.S. government hand out complimentary slave bucks to a bunch of sick human-exploiting bastards? Because one of history's most overrated dipshits, Abraham Lincoln, cared more about protecting property rights than he did about protecting human rights. And why did Abraham Lincoln care more about property rights than human rights? Because he was a fucking capitalist. And just like most capitalists, his moral compass tended to point directly up his own ass. So any report that claims that present-day wealthy people, most of whom are white, did it all on their own, that claims they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and elbow-greased their way to freakish affluence, is a fucking lie. A lie purchased and distributed by the wealthy with the express intention of attempting to trick the working class into slaving away for all eternity without objection. The reality is, all wealthy people are wealthy primarily as a result of lucky circumstances over which they had zero control. Luck is the primary factor in all of our fates, which is not to say it's the only factor. Certainly not. Another big factor is your individual talents, be they smarts or creativity or strength. But when researchers study the impact of talent on professional success, the results consistently show that the most talented people are not the most successful. For example, when a team of Italian physicists and economists built a digital model of society and filled it with virtual agents possessing a wide range of talents, and then allowed those virtual agents to duke it out over the simulated world's resources, the results showed that a person with mediocre talent and an abundance of lucky breaks will always be far more successful than a super talented person with an abundance of unlucky breaks. But really, you don't need a big fancy experiment to prove this. Just consider how one extremely lucky break, like winning the lottery, could instantly lift a poor person out of poverty, while one extremely unlucky break, like getting hit by a bus, could reduce even the most brilliant billionaire to an utterly talentless corpse. So, between the random circumstances of your birth, which decide your innate talents, and the subsequently random circumstances of your upbringing, which determine what skills and values you'll be taught before society declares you an adult, there is at least some argument to be made that no human being has ever really earned anything, and that our individual levels of success in society are simply the predetermined sums of grand cosmic equations that were set in motion long before Homo sapiens even evolved into existence. Again, this is not to say that I think you have no power over your life. I think you, an individual, have tons of power. If an individual asks me how can they, as an individual, live a happy and prosperous life, I'm not going to say, well, either you'll get lucky and it'll be good, or you'll get unlucky and it'll be bad. And nothing you can do. Might as well just pick a direction and start marching and let the chips fall where they may. Certainly not. I think that pretty much anything you want to accomplish in your individual life is at least possible. Short of super wacky things like spontaneously transforming your feet into rockets and flying to Jupiter in 3 seconds, or farting so hard it cracks the earth in half. Someday. And the first step to accomplishing whatever you want to accomplish is believing that you're capable. And the next step is taking actions to make your dream into a reality. That's true of everyone, regardless of economic or cultural background. At no point should you allow the statistical trends of a demographic to which you belong to discourage you from pursuing your dreams. You are not a statistic. You are a human being. And sometimes when you fail to accomplish something you wanted to accomplish, it will be because you made a foolish mistake or showed yourself to be incompetent or unreliable. And the majority of times, a person's position on the economic ladder of class is determined by systemic factors far beyond their control. So much shit about what a person's life will be is decided before they're born. Like in America, your life expectancy can be up to 20 years shorter just because of what zip code you were born in. Or, if you're a man and your genes happen to make you a little bit shorter than average, chances are your salary will be thousands of dollars lower than your equally capable, but a little bit taller, colleagues. Or, if you're a woman and your genes happen to make you a little bit fatter than average, chances are your salary will be thousands of dollars lower than your equally capable, but a bit slimmer, colleagues. Or if you're born black, chances are you'll make less money than your equally capable white colleagues. Or if you're born female, chances are you'll make less than your equally capable male colleagues. Or if you're born black and female, your salary will take a hit from both racism and sexism. Or if you're born gay or trans and you choose to express your authentic self, there's a much higher chance that some stupid fucking piece of shit bigot will murder you on the fucking street. And then you can't make any money at all. The list, unfortunately, goes on and on. To be clear, I'm not saying you can't be proud of your accomplishments. We are all human beings born into bizarre circumstances. And I think we all know that it takes something, some strength of will to get out of bed in the morning and go do stuff. It takes something on your part to chase your dreams and make them real. You can be proud of all that work you've done. You should be. Celebrate your personal creativity and commitment and success. Love yourself, please. And you should also acknowledge that Lady Luck was your dance partner every step of the way. And you should practice a level of humility and compassion which reflects that understanding. So, to review, wealthy people are wealthy primarily because they got lucky. And poor people are poor primarily because they got fist-fucked by the hands of fate. The economic classes, as they exist today, are not manifested by disparities in people's creativity or intelligence or physical strength or character. They are manifested primarily by disparities in people's economic privilege. That is a fact. Accept it or be a fool. Now, perhaps some of you are saying, "No shit, Sherlock. Of course life isn't fair. That's just the way life is. You can't blame that on capitalism." And of course, life is not fair, at least not in the traditional sense of the word. But isn't the whole purpose of a civilized society to make things more fair for more people? Like, if you're a capitalist who admits that the system is not fair and then writes that off as just the way things are, then how can you expect anyone born into poverty to obey the laws of this unfair system? If the system is not fair and the whole game is rigged for wealthy people, why should anyone who's not wealthy play along? Why shouldn't poor people join the ranks of organized crime? Why shouldn't poor people just march over to the nearest wealthy neighborhood and start smashing windows and taking shit? I think most capitalists would say that poor people shouldn't break into their homes and take their shit because that wouldn't be fair. Those things are mine. They're my things. My employees worked hard for them. If the system is not fair, then anyone the system disprivileges is entirely ethically justified in violating the legal boundaries of that system to get their needs met. If wealthy people don't want to spread the fruits of their luck around, then poor people have no choice but to take it by force or starve and die, which isn't really a choice at all. So, The longer these lucky wealthy people are allowed to pass their luck down to their lucky children, the more generational wealth will accumulate in the top 1%, further reducing poor people's access to opportunities for upward class mobility and entrenching the destructive power of a hyper-privileged few. Entrenched generational wealth, enabled and empowered by capitalism, is why wealth inequality in America and around the world has, over the last half a century, grown so consistently and with increasing speed. It's simple math. Wealthy kids are born into oodles of social privilege and disposable capital, and then use that power and wealth to essentially directly purchase even more wealth at a scale no poor person could ever dream of matching. Again, is it possible for a person who was born poor to work hard and use their imagination and make smart moves and climb up through the economic ranks until eventually they themselves become a member of the wealthy upper class? Certainly, it's totally possible. It happens. Just look at brilliant artist and philanthropist Dolly Parton. And notice how when a truly dirt poor kid like Dolly was actually claws their way up to the top of the money mountain through sheer talent and hard work, and white privilege, and pretty privilege, and able-bodied privilege, they then turn around and give away most of their money. Which says to me that any wealthy person who isn't currently giving away most of their money was probably never ever really poor at all, despite their many colorful claims of humble beginnings. So, while it is entirely possible to go from filthy rags to opulent riches in a single lifetime, today, in America, it is exceedingly rare. According to contemporary data, if you are born among the poorest 20% of Americans, there's only an 8% chance that you will ever make it to the richest 20%. Despite the fact that poor people tend to work much longer hours at far more physically demanding and societally integral jobs than wealthy people do. It's important to understand that to create and maintain any society, workers are a functional necessity. Whereas CEOs and shareholders and landlords are very much not. If we lived in a true meritocracy, then the people who grow our food and build our homes and maintain our infrastructure would be celebrated as community heroes, and Elon Musk would be an anonymous jizz mopper at a truck stop glory hole. But alas, under capitalism, hard work does not guarantee success and stability. Sadly, it usually guarantees the exact opposite. A lifetime of working yourself to the bone just to keep your bills paid, and never having the time or energy to pursue your larger dreams, or even just take a nice afternoon nap. And the precious few poor people who actually do make it to the upper class are generally only able to do so if they can come up with some product or service that not only will make them rich, but will also make a bunch of already super rich investors even richer than they already are. This is yet another way that capitalism funnels money up from the working class into the pockets of the top 1%. Under capitalism, you are not allowed to succeed on a large scale without providing a hefty kickback to wealthy investors who not only won't work as hard as you and your employees do, if they work at all, but also don't even remotely need the money that you're kicking back to them. If you explain this to a devout capitalist, they may claim that it's good for those super wealthy people to get even wealthier, because then they have even more money they can invest in poor people's businesses. But this is essentially just a rewording of the old idea of trickle-down economics, a notion that has been widely debunked by myriad studies for fucking decades. Making rich people richer does not make poor people richer. Never has, never will. The money never trickles down because wealthy people are essentially irrational buttholes. And one symptom of their irrational buttholery is that they compulsively hoard wealth they don't even need, often going so far as to even hide huge sums of money in secret offshore accounts. Now, you may think that saying all wealthy people are irrational buttholes is a bit extreme, and I get that. But all the studies I've seen seem to confirm this assertion. One of the best examples is a study carried out by social psychologists at UC Berkeley, where 100 pairs of strangers were asked to play the classic board game Monopoly, but with a twist. The game was rigged. One of the two players was provided with twice as much money at the start of the game, received twice as much money every time they passed go, and they got to roll 2 dice instead of 1, allowing them to move around the board much more quickly. To be clear, the unfairly enriched player was absolutely aware of their privilege. They even participated in a coin toss before the game that randomly decided they would be the privileged one. Then the researchers let the games play out and they watched what happened on hidden cameras. And this is what they found. Over the course of the game, the more that the privileged player was enriched by their privilege, the more they behaved as though they had accomplished something impressive. They pumped their fists and bragged about how much fake money they'd acquired. They got ruder and meaner. They started smacking their piece harder on the board when they moved like a total badass. They even ate more of the pretzels that researchers left out on the table than the non-privileged player did. After the game, when the unfairly privileged players were questioned about their wins, they responded by explaining how they had made smart moves and earned their success, seemingly oblivious to the extreme privilege that they were randomly and explicitly provided with at the beginning of the game. The results were consistent across the board with all of the participants in the study, regardless of gender or race. Further studies by the same research team revealed that the higher the level of a person's success, the lower their levels of empathy and compassion, and the higher their levels of entitlement and self-interest. To put it bluntly, economic privilege quite literally breaks the human brain. Privilege undermines our very perception of reality. And it reliably produces cruel, callous human beings with colossal delusions of grandeur. And that's why I think it's totally fair to say that all wealthy people, all of them, are irrational buttholes. And remember, at the end of the day, it's not really wealthy people's fault that they're all irrational buttholes. Were you or I put in the same economic position, our human brains would no doubt respond at least very similarly. Unless, perhaps, we were previously educated on the dynamics at play, either academically in a classroom or experientially in the school of hard knocks, and thus somewhat inoculated against our brain's bad habits. But in any case, based on hard evidence, we can conclude that when a human brain is subjected to unfair privilege, it will tend to take credit for that unearned advantage, rather than acknowledging that its advantage was, in fact, not earned. We also know that under capitalism, there will always be a teensy hyper-privileged owner class and a massive impoverished worker class. Because capitalism requires a constant supply of financially desperate workers to keep the whole twisted machine running. To put it another way, under capitalism, only some people can be business owners. Because if every person, or even just most people, became a business owner, there'd be no one left to work as employees at all the businesses. Just as only some people can be landlords, because if everyone was a landlord, there'd be no one left to rent housing to. Under capitalism, the owner class will always be a privileged minority, with the power to, materially speaking, unilaterally shape society as they see fit. Ergo, we can safely conclude that so long as we, as a people, allow capitalism to endure, Earth will continue to be a global nightmare casino ruled by a tiny pack of spoiled, shallow, delusional jerk-offs. And said tiny pack of spoiled, shallow, delusional jerk-offs will continue to steer society towards mass suffering, mass death, and potential extinction. Global industry's reckless exploitation of our natural resources will continue to bring about ever-worsening climate catastrophes. Wealth inequality will continue to grow, leaving Gen Z with an even smaller share of the world's wealth than millennials currently control, which is an even smaller share of the wealth than boomers controlled in their prime. And human freedom will continue to shrink as capitalist states wield their obedient police forces to protect private property and suppress any and all dissent. So, we've established that capitalism is totally shitty crap, and it makes the world worse for all living things. And if capitalism is allowed to continue, chances are we'll either all go extinct or be sold into space slavery. It's a fact. Conservatives and liberals, please stop denying this fact. Please? As long as you deny this fundamental fact, all of your sociopolitical analyses and prescriptions will be, at best, confused, and at worst, apocalyptic dog shit. I swear, watching conservatives and liberals try to solve society's problems without ever criticizing capitalism is like watching a detective try to solve the case of why are we all covered with diarrhea while simultaneously ignoring the pantsless man swinging from the chandelier. Perhaps the real solution to our problems is to get that figurative diarrhea man down off the chandelier, and not for every individual human on Earth to invent their own shit-proof hat. And pulling the diarrhea man down off the chandelier is not enough. We have to replace him with something better. Which leads us to the question, what would be better than capitalism? In the long term, I think we should all be pursuing high-tech space communism, a la Star Trek. And considering the limitations of current technology and where the average American's brain is at, I don't think that's a realistic next step. What I think we could realistically transition into in the near future is some form of market socialism. A system wherein all fundamental human needs, food, water, housing, medical care, and education, are decommodified, and all businesses above a certain size, let's say 5 employees, become democratically controlled worker co-ops. If you don't know what a worker co-op is, essentially it's a business where all the employees get to vote on how the business is operated, including voting on leadership and negotiating wages. Instead of the business being owned by shareholders who don't do shit, the business is owned by the workers who do shit. Many capitalists love to scoff at the idea of worker co-ops and claim that if you let workers vote on how much they should get paid, everyone will just vote that they should get $1 million an hour and nothing would work. These capitalists think this because they're stupid and they hate their employees and hate people in general. The reality is many worker co-ops already exist all around the world. And extensive data shows that when compared to conventional businesses, worker co-ops are more productive, more resistant to price shocks, and they make their employees a whole lot fucking happier. Here's a fun statistic. 50 to 60% of traditional corporations fail in their first year. You know what percentage of worker co-ops fail in their first year? 10%. That's lower than 60. And after 5 years, only 3 to 5% of traditional corporations stay open. 3 to 5%. You know what percentage of worker co-ops stay open past their first 5 years? 90%! And a multitude of studies have shown that, unsurprisingly, when workers have democratic control over their workplace, they report a much higher level of job satisfaction. Who would have fucking thunk? Worker co-ops are just better than traditional corporations. Better for both human beings and the businesses that capitalists claim to care so much about. Under a market socialist system like the one I'm suggesting, there would still be hierarchies of power, and there would still be money, and there would still be luxury goods you could buy with money. The power and money would just be radically more equitably distributed. Because instead of having a capitalist system where the only way a poor person can get rich is by exploiting the labor of other poor people and making already rich people even richer than they already are, we'd have a socialist system where the only way to make money would be to do actual fucking work. And there would no longer be CEOs paying themselves hundreds of times as much as the workers who actually make their business function. Plus, any professional failure would no longer be a fucking death sentence, because all basic human necessities would be guaranteed regardless of employment. And if you're wondering how we'd pay for that, well, we'd tax the fuck out of wealthy people, of course, which would not only result in the end of poverty, but would also rein in the development of any wealth inequality. And if you're one of those right-wing libertarian sweethearts who's horrified by the idea of being heavily taxed just because you're living at the tippity top of a socio-industrial hierarchy built on the backs of your fellow human beings, maybe you're not the kind of person who should be in a position of power over any other human beings ever. At this point, some of you Americans watching this may be a bit confused, considering that, generally speaking, American schools teach that capitalism is when there is money and freedom, And socialism is when everyone wears a gray suit and works in a work camp and starves to death. But surprise, surprise, that's a highly inaccurate and some might say propagandistic explanation. If you study human history just a smidge, you'll find that money was invented long before capitalism, and so were markets. What makes capitalism capitalism is not the mere existence of a purportedly free market with standardized currency. What makes capitalism capitalism is capital controlling the means of production. That is the defining attribute that distinguishes capitalism from all other economic systems. Or, to put it another way, capitalism is a system wherein an extremely wealthy minority controls the material means by which the things society needs get made, and uses that power to ruthlessly extract value from the working class. Or, to put it in a far more blunt and straightforward way, capitalism is slavery. Capitalism started with slavery, it's manifested slavery everywhere it's taken root, and even today, in America, where slavery is supposedly illegal, there are more black people currently working in for-profit prisons for pennies a day than there were black people enslaved at the height of chattel slavery in America. Like, do you really get that? That right now in America, there are more black people behind bars, locked up, imprisoned, working their asses off for essentially no money than there were enslaved black people at the height of chattel slavery. Things haven't changed that much. And even the majority of free present-day Americans are working paycheck to paycheck, which is wage slavery. Like, seriously, ever since the Emancipation Proclamation and similar legislation that was carried out around the world, it seems like capitalists have just been trying to see how close to chattel slavery they can get without people rioting. Hey, we get it. Literal shackles on people's wrists and ankles was wrong. It was a wrong thing we did. All the whips and the sexual assault and the psychological torture, just awful, terrible stuff. Glad we got rid of it. Good riddance, I say. Now, what do you working class folks think about a totally different thing that is not slavery at all, where we, the owner class, control everything, and you, the worker class, do all the work? But now, instead of being provided with room and board as part of your slavery, we'll actually pay you less than your labor is worth, and then you can take that fund money and go out and choose your own food and housing. That's right, no more having to settle for whatever the kitchen slaves are cooking up tonight. Now you can choose whichever drive-thru you want. And you can choose which corporation you want to work for. And if you don't like working for that corporation, well, then you just go ahead and you exercise your spectacular freedom and you quit that job and then get another job immediately, or else you will be sentenced to death by poverty. Now, if that's not freedom from slavery, I don't know what is. Of course, capitalism did not invent slavery. Slavery was a common practice all around the world long before capitalism came along. Capitalists just made slavery even more cruel and more inhumane than it commonly was before the advent of capitalism. And then they went on to rebrand slavery with a comprehensive marketing campaign. You're not enslaved, you're employed. Those aren't slave owners, they're shareholders. We're not coercing you with the threat of death. We're motivating you with the promise of wealth. So, under capitalism, workers are enslaved, one way or another, by the capital-owning class that controls the means of production. Whereas socialism is a system wherein workers control those same means of production. A system where everyone who works gets to be a part owner of the business they work at. Where everyone has a substantive stake in society, where everyone grapples with the problems presented by our shared material reality, and everyone reaps the rewards of developing functional solutions. A system where we collaborate and share resources on a global scale, and finally manifest true human freedom on a level heretofore only dreamed. This is why I and many other socialists simply don't buy the popular assertion that any of history's so-called failed socialist states, like the USSR or Maoist China, were ever actually really socialist at all. They did sometimes enact some socialist policies, which, for as long as they lasted, seemed to reliably produce positive results, like people being fed and housed. And we can point to some specific success stories in their histories, like the world-changing technological breakthroughs achieved by the USSR's space program. But then those supposedly socialist states also did a bunch of authoritarian capitalist shit that ruined everything. Either because they were pushed into a corner by external capitalist imperialist forces and acted out of desperation, or just because a few guys at the top felt like being fucking scumbags. Like, one of the key features of socialist philosophy from its infancy all the way through to today is advocating for workers to control the means of production. So how the fuck can anyone call Stalin's Russia, with its gulags where workers were viciously forced to work against their will, socialist? That's just not socialism. Gulags are anti-socialist. So fuck Stalin, fuck Lenin, fuck Mao, fuck them all. And fuck falling into the trap of trying to defend these fucks as though acknowledging how shitty they were somehow invalidates socialism. It doesn't. It's also worth noting that while Russia did indeed have a lot of problems during their communist experiment, when their leaders tried to save the nation with new capitalist policies, all of the problems that existed under their form of communism only got worse. Like, if capitalism is so great, then why didn't capitalism fix Russia? Why did their conversion to capitalism result in a new fascist state ruled by Vladimir Putin, one of the most despicable dickheads to ever live? Could it be that the USSR's problems were rooted in neither a legitimate form of socialism nor a lack of capitalism? Perhaps! I know these semantic dynamics make the whole discussion more confusing. Not to mention the historical trend of fascists insincerely adopting socialist labels and talking points to help them drum up popular support and seize power. Like how the Nazis called themselves the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and then, the moment they seized power, turned around and executed all the communists. And it is integral that we find some way to navigate the nuance, transcend our collective confusion, and perceive reality. Because despite what we've been taught in American schools, we as a society are fully capable of transitioning to a socialist system without abolishing money or abolishing luxury goods or forcing everyone to wear drab utilitarian uniforms. Under the kind of market socialism that I'm suggesting, every American who already works would only get paid more for the work they already do. The only people who would end up poorer are people who don't contribute any value to society, like corporate shareholders and landlords. And all of the money that hyper-privileged minority would lose would go directly to the workers, who make up 99% of the population. And all those former shareholders and landlords would be perfectly fine, because they'd be guaranteed housing and food and medical care. And they'd be perfectly free to work and earn an income in the new market socialist system. Or sit at home and sulk and save the rest of us from having to endure their atrocious personalities. Unfortunately, most Americans are seemingly unaware of what socialism makes possible, because they've been miseducated, just like I was. Knowing what I know now, I am absolutely amazed at just how misleading my education was in regards to these issues. Like, for example, have you ever heard of Albert Einstein? You know, the smart guy? Like, the official smart guy of Western civilization? A man whose name in our culture is quite literally synonymous with genius? Of course you have. We all have. But did you know that Albert Einstein was a socialist? A passionate socialist. A socialist so passionate that he penned a lengthy article on the subject to help launch a socialist magazine. Did any of your American teachers at American schools ever mention that fact to you? Or did they just cut E equals MC squared out of construction paper and staple it to a fucking bulletin board? What does it say about a system of education that it would, on the one hand, teach us that Einstein was supposedly history's greatest genius, but also, on the other hand, not mention that he thought capitalism was unethical and should be replaced with socialism. What does it say about our society that it's produced a populace that, generally speaking, believes both that Einstein was a god-brained ultra genius and that socialists are stupid? Could it be that capitalist indoctrination is a key component of American schooling? A component that consists of both explicit endorsement of the capitalist system and strategic omission of facts that might call the default status of capitalism into question? Maybe! So just so you know, conservatives and liberals of America, every time you say that socialism could never work, you are simultaneously implying that you are smarter than Einstein. And maybe you are. I'm not saying you're not. Maybe every single conservative and liberal in America is smarter than Einstein. But what if, just for sake of discussion, they're not? What if the only reason any American is not already a socialist today is either A, they're a super rich fuckface who wants to keep super rich fuckfacing around, or B, they've been taught bad logic and denied the facts? I hope that if you, watching this right now, are not already a socialist, that what I've said here has at least caused you to question some of your beliefs about socialism. I hope I provided you with some new ideas and maybe some new perspectives on old ideas. And speaking of old ideas, I should probably tackle one more anti-socialist argument that is super popular with both conservatives and liberals. Socialism sounds nice on paper, but it can never work because human nature. This common argument asserts that our current capitalist society is merely our most fundamental human traits writ large on a planetary canvas. And as such, capitalism's negative outcomes, like poverty and slavery and endless war, can never be transcended by any human society, because wherever we go, there we are. To quote many an American liberal, the problem isn't capitalism. The problem is greed. And while human greed certainly has existed in some form for as long as humans have, all available evidence suggests that our most fundamental human nature is not to exploit and kill each other in pursuit of the biggest pile of bananas. Rather, our most fundamental human nature is to collaborate and thrive as a collective, to gather bananas together and then throw a banana party. To be fair, for a long time, the commonly held belief among biologists and historians was that our competitive nature was what accounted for our evolutionary success. And according to modern evidence and scientific analysis, that was not the case. Rather, humanity's climb to the top of the food chain was facilitated first and foremost by our ability to flexibly collaborate. Did competition play a role as well? Yes, definitely. And our ability to collaborate was the key ingredient. Our ability to communicate and organize and combine our creativity. We did not become strong by culling the weakest among us. We became strong by valuing and leveraging the strength in everyone. And of course, we've also always struggled with greed and cruelty and short-sightedness. It's not that capitalists invented greed or exploitation or warfare. No socialist I know of has ever made that argument. It's that capitalists created a new system of globe-spanning colonial domination, cruel labor exploitation, and reckless resource extraction that incentivizes greed and toxic individualism and disincentivizes sharing and generosity. To such a degree that now 99% of us are either being economically coerced into working full-time for a capitalist while simultaneously bearing witness to a climate apocalypse that is caused by capitalism, or starving in a gutter. I think one potent reason why so many Americans believe that it's human nature to fight over resources and pursue power over each other and just generally treat each other like shit is because so many of us were given an assignment in school to read Lord of the Flies, a book written by a conservative author named William Golding, a man who was once quoted as saying, quote, "I have always understood the Nazis because I am that way by nature." In the very silly book he wrote, a group of schoolboys are marooned on a deserted island. And not too long after their arrival, they revert to animalistic instincts, smear themselves with war paint, and attack each other. But in reality, when a group of 6 real young boys from Tonga were marooned on a real deserted island, and remained trapped there, for real, for over a year, those real boys were not overtaken by some intrinsic human nature that drove them to fight over resources to the death. Instead, these real-life, real boys deserted on a real island established a collaborative commune and worked together to create a garden where they grew food, hollowed out tree trunks to store drinking water, pens where they raised chickens, a permanent fire for the whole year plus, and they even built a makeshift gymnasium and badminton court. And they did all that with nothing but an old knife, their bare hands, and the relatively desolate island's limited resources. Not only that, but when one of the boys fell and broke his leg, the other boys set the bone and took care of him until he completely healed. Why don't American schools teach kids about real-life stories like that actually fucking happened? Instead of telling kids to read an unrealistic, misleading book written by a confused right-wing Nazi sympathizer. But while our primary nature as humans is to collaborate and work and thrive together, unfortunately, our nature can be superseded by cultural conditioning. And that's where capitalism comes in. Capitalism encourages our worst tendencies and discourages our best. And as long as we are living within the confines of capitalism and are subject to its all-encompassing, brain-pretzeling influence, we will never really know who we could be outside of it. But we can imagine. We can use currently available evidence to imagine what socialism could make possible. Imagine a world where no one is hungry, not a single person, not a single child, and no one is homeless. And anyone who's sick or injured is receiving the best medical care technologically possible. Imagine a world where no group of human beings is ever again scapegoated as the source of all of society's ills, because we will have all finally identified the true source of all of society's ills, capitalism. Imagine a world not devoid of competition, but a world where what we compete over is opportunities to contribute, instead of competing over the right to eat a sandwich. It is possible, and the first step is to believe. So, do you believe? Do you accept the facts about capitalism and socialism? And do you believe that we can do better than the current kaleidoscopic circus of horrors that capitalism has recklessly wrought? Fantastic! Thrilled to hear it. You believe. Now what do we do next? First of all, be loud and proud. Socialism is good. Socialism offers functional solutions to the greatest problems currently facing the species. And you shouldn't feel weird about supporting socialism and singing its praises. Socialism! Secondly, get connected with your community. Get to know your neighbors. Organize with like-minded people. Support progressive organizations. Drop off some food at a community fridge. Distribute food and water to your unhoused neighbors. Plant a little vegetable garden and invite your neighbors to come help tend it and then share all the food it produces. Anything that strengthens the bonds of your local community and reduces dependence on destructive capitalist structures. At the same time, don't buy into the myth that just modifying your individual behavior will save the world. Climate change and so many other big problems we're currently facing are not the result of irresponsible individuals. They're the result of irresponsible institutions. And as such, they require sweeping systemic solutions to remedy them. Thirdly, speaking of sweeping systemic solutions, don't listen to other leftists who tell you to not vote. You should vote. You should go out and vote. Vote for legitimate leftists when you can. And vote for Democrats when you can't. Not because Dems are the best people for the job, damn near none of them are, and damn near all of them endorse the lies of capitalist ideology. The reason to vote for Democrats is mostly, but not exclusively, to keep Republicans out of power. Because Republicans are fascists, and they are hell-bent on obliterating democracy. And if they are able to acquire the power that they desire, there will be little good people can do to achieve any kind of social progress. Until said hypothetical fascist regime either self-destructs or is toppled by a foreign military power. Or both! So please, go out and vote for boring, spineless, corporatist Democrats. And volunteer in campaigns for more progressive left-wing candidates. And vote for them too. And engage in protests and civil disobedience. And make sure to give the Democratic Party many tons of shit every time they work to sabotage an excellent and honest left-wing candidate like Bernie Sanders. You can do all of those things simultaneously, while also trumpeting the fact that wealthy oligarchs will never really allow you to vote their wealth away. Just voting is not enough to solve the problems that currently threaten the survival of the species. And voting does have a big impact on the course of human history. That is undeniable. Just look at the COVID pandemic. Like, I'm not particularly fond of Hillary, Biden, or Obama. They're all super powerful people who choose unceasing political centrism, when they could choose fierce revolutionary honesty and aggressive unapologetic activism. And the world is worse off for them making that choice. And any of those Democrats would have handled the pandemic way better than it was handled by Trump. At the very least, none of them would have become one of the primary sources of COVID misinformation on Earth the way that Trump did. If any Democrat had been elected instead of Trump, at least hundreds of thousands of human lives would have been saved. So don't ever say that voting makes no difference. It's simply not true. Instead, be specific in your criticism of the current voting system. Speak to the specific limitations of voting as we know it. Illustrate how, no matter who we vote for, the rich keep getting richer, goods and services keep getting more expensive, more and more things we used to be able to own we now must rent, from housing to word processing software, and the military-industrial complex lumbers ever onward, spreading death and misery all around the globe. The current voting system is definitely a disaster and not true democracy, but it's also not useless. And if we want our voting system to get better, one of the best things we can do is push for a transition to a ranked choice voting system, which would be far more functional and equitable than our current voting system. Don't know what ranked choice voting is? It's a bit complicated, so I'm not going to explain it all here, but just make a note to Google it. Ranked choice voting! And fourthly, in terms of specific government policies for which we should all advocate, the two most important ones, in my view, are universal health care and universal higher education. Policies that leftists and liberals should be able to agree on. No two policies would do more to push us towards a healthier and more functional socialist future. If everyone had access to as much education as they want, and no one could ever be bankrupted by an unexpected medical bill, this society might even start to resemble a real meritocracy. And if we further decommodify food and water and housing, we might not even need to legislate the standardization of worker co-ops. That might just happen organically. Because in a world where workers always have the option to not work if they so choose, those workers would always have leverage in negotiations with potential employers. And thus, employers would have no choice but to seriously consider the wishes of their workers in everything they do. The onus would finally be on employers to make work at their businesses legitimately appealing and legitimately fulfilling, to make fair rules, to pay fair wages, to pursue ethical, socially valuable goals, to listen to the thoughts and concerns and suggestions of the workers who make their business possible, instead of how it is now, where the onus is on workers to get back to work or die. In a world where everyone can freely quit their job whenever they want, asshole bosses would quite literally go extinct, and smart, compassionate leaders would naturally take their place. Shitty jobs would become a haunting memory in our collective consciousness, the stuff of strange, ancient situational comedies. While truly innovative enterprises, empowered by labor-saving automation, would offer their workers not just proper compensation, but a sense of leadership, contribution, purpose, and dignity. And then, slowly but surely, as we work together and leverage the phenomenal power of simple, honest conversation, every single problem on Earth would be solved. Sound too utopian to you? I don't give a fuck! Literally every example of major social progress humanity has ever achieved has been called utopian before it was real. Anybody who thinks that a world that legitimately works for everyone is an unachievable utopian fantasy is simply lacking in both imagination and willpower, and their delusions of pragmatic maturity should never be indulged. Just my 2 cents. As I've pondered all this socioeconomic stuff over the last few years, there's a phrase that's been floating around my head more and more. A phrase that I expect to be a guiding moral principle for the rest of my life. And that phrase is, kids deserve the truth. Looking back on my own childhood, I feel so massively grateful to the adults who actually told me the truth about how the world works. Whether they were family members or friends or teachers or artists I'd never met. But one thing that no adult ever taught me was why exactly is capitalism supposedly good? And why exactly is socialism supposedly bad? And on some level, that always creeped me out. To have this moral notion consistently impressed upon me by every facet of society, and yet seemingly never accompanied by any kind of sensical, concrete explanation. Just a vague implication that to think otherwise would be both evil and stupid. And so, I want to do whatever I can to provide all people, but especially young people, with the knowledge and understanding of which I feel I was deprived. In the hope that we can all work together to dismantle the toxic systems that currently rule the world and replace them with far more just and equitable alternatives. So if you're one of the majority of Americans under 25 who already think that capitalism is totally fucking awful, I'm here to tell you, you are correct. And anyone who tells you differently is either innocently confused or maliciously lying. And if you have kids or you know kids, please, for the love of humanity, do them and all of society a huge favor and tell them the fucking truth about capitalism. Tell them that universal healthcare would not only save way more human lives, but would also cost American taxpayers less. Tell them that there are currently far more empty houses in America than there are homeless people. And we are choosing to allow more than 500,000 human beings to sleep on the street. Tell them that the world already produces more than enough food for everyone, and we are choosing to allow 9 million people a year to starve to death. Tell them that the capitalist food industry regularly destroys large quantities of perfectly edible food just to keep the prices up and protect the profits of wealthy people. Tell them that everyone could be fed, everyone could be housed, everyone could receive the medical care they need today. And tell them that the only reason those good things don't happen is because the capitalists who currently own society do not want them to. Please do not sentence your children to a lifetime of laboring under the fantasy that they live in a capitalist meritocracy. Don't let them believe that every poor person they encounter must be lazy or incompetent, or that every rich person they encounter is some kind of golden-brained, iron-willed business genius who began their career with nothing but a tin can, a dirty old sock, and a dream. Tell kids the truth, so that they can see and approach the world as it actually is, with eyes unclouded by capitalist deceptions. And so they can leverage their individual merits and learn from their individual failures accordingly. Tell kids the truth so they don't stumble into the hands of capitalist con artists or resign to becoming yet another capitalist con artist themselves. Tell kids the truth so that they may transcend the sucker salesman binary and become active champions of a burgeoning social paradigm that will be more functional, more equitable, and more humane than any that preceded it. Do whatever big or small thing you can to stop the propagation of this vile, toxic mistruth that capitalism is good. Because capitalism is not good. Capitalism is exploitative. Capitalism is inhumane. Capitalism is unethical. Capitalism is slavery. It's not fair or free or inescapable. Capitalism is an empire of lies. And we can do better. And I believe that we will. The end.
Cast off your chains.